Hi everyone, it's me, John Chiun Cheng. It's been a while since some of you have probably seen me, but I recently had some thoughts and I wanted to share them. So it all begins about a year and a half ago when I made the unexpected decision to quit my day job and stay home to be a full-time father. This wasn't an easy choice for me at the time because for well over a decade, I've been directing my life towards the craft of writing and creating, pursuing a career in entertainment. Until I changed course to take care of my son, that was the discovery that kept driving me forward. But everything changed with Minu's birth. This is a place where you might expect me to talk about how rewarding it's been to raise a child, and I'm not going to say that caring for Minu hasn't helped me grow in certain unexpected ways. But I've also discovered that there are major pitfalls to becoming both a parent and a primary caregiver. Things that I wasn't ready for, and consequently, things that I didn't even realize were negatively affecting me for quite a long time. One of the biggest shell shocks you experience when you become a new parent is just how much time and attention your infant demands. They are entirely helpless and reliant upon you for their survival. And for those earliest months, your life tends to warp around them because they need constant attention to sleep, to feed, and repeat. This part I think we expected, and so you kind of drop a lot of everything else that was previously going on in your life to do so. I put my writers groups, game groups, creative projects, recreational activities, personal groups, and even church attendance on hold because this tiny person needed me to eat and rest all day and all night. I think unless you have live-in co-caregivers, whether volunteer or paid, this part is just going to be a given for a little while for most people. The part that I wasn't ready for was how all that stuff that I put on hold in my life just stayed on hold, especially as I quit my job and transitioned to full-time parenting. I told myself at first it was because there was so much I was learning about how to parent, and Minu was constantly growing and changing. So it was true that there was a lot to adapt to, and watching a young one all day can be pretty exhausting. I found myself sleeping whenever he would sleep because it's all I could do to get through the day. But he kept growing and changing while I didn't. We sleep trained him a little over 4 months old, and suddenly I had time in the evenings again. But still tired because of the day of watching him, I resorted to little things like keeping up my long-running hobbies of reviewing entertainment on my blogs. But I never called back my different groups to reform them, and I didn't take the time to continue pursuing my creative projects or return to church. Yes, I'm an introvert, so it's emotionally costly for me to organize people, and I was on limited energy after Minu was put to bed every night. But these things were once quite important to me, and now they weren't even on my radar. The months eventually stretched to now, about 1.5 years since I quit my job. Minu has developed into quite the active toddler, able to express himself by speech. Wait, you're not sleepy? And he plays pretty well even without me for short periods. He likes to draw, have me read him books, play with toy instruments, sing, dance, listen to music. Run around on the playground, experiment with toys, and watch the little bits of television we allow for him, among other things. And there is some joy in reflecting on how well he's growing up, even if sometimes there's a mischievous glint in his eye, sometimes when I'm out of earshot, followed by a loud noise and some crying as he does something we insist he not do for his safety. But I think by most metrics, I've been doing a pretty good job at being a full-time father, undoubtedly with the full support of my indispensable and loving wife and Minu's mother at my side when she's off of work. I believe Minu would give me pretty high marks, with perhaps the exception of not allowing enough TV time or letting him stay up late. I even think I'm doing a decent enough job as a husband despite the challenge of taking care of a toddler during the day. But one thing that I only just realized that I was doing a terrible job at during all this time was that I was doing a terrible job of being me. I'm not going to say that I am necessarily defined at the center by everything that I was doing before we had Minu, and I am amazed by how inessential some of these specific hobbies, groups, and activities turned out to be when it came time to devote most of my attention and energy to Minu. as an understandably needy infant. But as Minu became more independent and regular, I never went back to much of who I was before him. And this was a problem because I was instead letting myself be entirely defined by my roles as a father and a husband. And letting these things become your central identity does turn out to create some significant problems. This all came to a head in the last month as Donald Trump returned to the White House, and I found myself being filled with dread as I watched his early presidency predictably play out. I'm not going to go further into the politics of all this, and the point isn't the politics, but instead the recognition that, for me, for the first time in many, many years, I found myself with the unease of fear and dread in me. Why this is significant is that for many years, I was freed from the grip of fear, even during the first Trump administration, because I found myself then at a place of great spiritual growth. Although there was much in my Christian faith that I was still grappling with, both theologically and philosophically, I found how to live out Jesus' commands in my life in a real tangible way, loving those within my community with the particular ways that God has gifted me. And no small amount of that was serving others by organizing those writers groups and game nights and Christian groups and so forth, even through the sometimes draining experience of being a very social introvert. But I found that as I was acting in love of my fellows, I was being filled up and satisfied, living out my faith in a way far beyond the mere head knowledge of scripture and theology that I was accustomed to in the older way that I understood the Christian faith. In the first letter of John in the Bible, he writes, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love." At that point in my life, and for the better part of a decade, until I became a father, I found this to be absolutely true. I lived a life without fear or anxiety, and found boldness and confidence derived from my understanding of who I was to God, and how I was living out his precepts, secure that my faith in Jesus drove me. That was more than enough to push me through the first Trump presidency. But this time, it was different. And while there are certainly more than enough causes for concern in the way that things are playing out, I had to pause and recognize this long-foreign feeling of fear in me again. And it was then that I realized that exclusively pursuing my role as a father and a husband, that I had cut away some of what was even more important to me, my life in Jesus. I thought that by focusing exclusively on being a father and husband was powered by faith, but the old telltale signs of personal troubles were apparent. I was bored, constantly distracted by the news cycle or shiny new baubles that I would buy but didn't even play with, spending time absorbing copious amounts of probably worthwhile information, but to no end. I filled some of my time with my old solo hobbies of taking in music and movies and shows and games and reviewing them, but eventually found myself distracted from even doing that consistently. And then the worry crept into my life. Worry about the many who are going to suffer and die in this new world that we are witnessing being shaped. Worry about how Minu will have to navigate an increasingly hostile, poverty-stricken, and environmentally damaged world. And in all of this, I did find a church that I was hopeful could help reinvigorate my faith. But in my role as a father and husband first, I never grew in that community beyond just attending Sunday services and leaving because my child came before my faith. And that was my idolatry. Now, some of you might think it odd that putting my child and my wife before my faith is a bad thing, but for me, it is my faith in Jesus that ends up empowering me to love courageously and relentlessly. But in some ways, I am grateful for the self-recognition granted to me by my own recognizing my growing fear, because it helped me to realize that I needed to change the order of my life right now. I needed to go back, at least in some ways, to the me that I was before I was a father, living my faith first so that I can share that limitless love with, yes, my family, but also with the broader community. Because there really isn't much loving your neighbor as you love yourself that you can do when you barely ever interact with your neighbors. To that end, I realized that I need my faith community and will be attempting to further involve myself both with my church and the broader faith community that I've been a part of. But this also means that I have to recognize that I've been given my creative and critical impulses for a reason and return to my projects and gathering with other creatives again to support each other. And yes, even a return to the occasional board game night. All of this tempered to some extent by my necessary role as my wife's husband, Minu's father, and soon father to our second child. In some ways, this has been a rough couple years, perhaps the roughest of the last decade. So I recognize that being a parent is something that does reward us with joy, but also fills our lives with new, time-consuming challenges. But I am filled with hope, thanks to this recent revelation and plan. And although I know that the time will be coming this year for more sleepless infant care nights, and then somehow juggling an infant and a toddler at the same time, so maybe the implementation of the revived me might be in fits and starts, but having been through the process of caring for an infant before, and now knowing to care for my own spirit as much as my family's, I do truly believe once again that love will conquer all. In our family, in our community, our country, and our world. It won't be perfect, but it all starts with us taking steps to share our love with each other on all of these levels, and I'm grateful to God that I will continue to have the opportunity to do so.
I love you.